paper today.
All right, so I'd like to call the September regular meeting of the CVSD Board to order. We are going to start with a quick executive session in the next room. It should take just a few minutes. So if we all board members and any applicable central staff will just go next door, and we will be back. Shouldn't be more than 5 minutes.
5-minute break.
So we're out of executive session. Are you guys ready? One thing I neglected to mention as we went into executive session was we went in for purposes of discussing contract negotiations. So I wanted to correct the record because that's required. Do we have any adjustments to the agenda by board members?
We have one.
Yes. We do have one adjustment. We are removing 9.4 fund transportation study from the agenda. All right, so before we move to audience communications, we have a few introductions to make. One is we have a new student member, Kyle Bergeron, who's a junior at CVU, and he's our second student member. And Thomas Daly has been here for a year with us, and he's going to take Kyle under his wing and show him the ropes and get him ready for the next year. Also, this is an opportunity for many people who were previously on different boards to see some of our administrators who are here in the audience for the first time. So just put faces with names. If folks in the audience could just stand up and let us know who you are. Greg
Marino, lead principal at Williston.
Okay.
Stephanie Sumner, lead principal at CCS. I'm Jen Roth. I'm the co-principal, middle level instructional leader at CCS.
Barbara Ann Thomas-Bonfil, Director of Communications and Public Relations.
Okay. And then we have two. Go ahead, yes.
Christine Lloyd Newberry, Director of Integrated Wellness in the School District.
Okay.
Jeff Toberoff, design tech teacher at CVU.
Okay. That's great. So thank you for that. Is there anyone here in the audience separate from business on the agenda who would like to speak? Okay, hearing none, we'll move on to reports of the board.
Do they want to know us? In some cases,
It's a good point, Joan. Well taken. So we'll go around. Yeah. We can go around the table and introduce everyone. Yeah.
Kevin Merrill, I'm our representative, a representative. I'm Ray Maynard from Heinsberg.
Lynn Jonick from Charlotte.
Joan Lennis, Shelburne.
Kelly Bowen, St. George.
I'm Dave Connery, and I want to steal Russ Caffrey's thunder and say I'm part of the Champlain Valley School District, but previously I was a resident of the town of Shelburne.
I think you're still a resident.
Go ahead.
Colleen McKinnon, I reside in Heinsberg.
Russ Caffrey. Oops, sorry.
No, I was already
Already did you
introduced.
guys.
Great. Okay. Thank you. All right. Reports to the board. We'll start with 5.1.1, which is our Communications and Community Connections Committee. And I don't know if our new...
Can I just say something
Yeah.
about what's linked here?
Yep.
So what you have linked here are the minutes of these board meetings, which are the public minutes that are kind of at the same level as the minutes that we have for our board meetings. There are also internal minutes that every board member can have access to that will get shared out by the committees themselves.
Okay. And maybe can we change the text that's on the FTP page where we go to download these minutes so that we can tell people hyperlinks within all of these documents will lead you to more detail,
So you want that on the website?
either on the website or even on this agenda until
Oh, I
people get
see.
used to it,
Okay,
because people still aren't gonna
we'll
remember.
figure out where to put that.
I also forgot one piece of business, which is I'm gonna pass this piece of paper bring it over to Kevin. And this is, it's a piece of paper we want you folks to fill out with your preferred email for correspondence, preferred phone number, and any comments about using those. This is in response to just trying to find the best way to communicate with people. I know we sent out a text message last week, and there were some comments about that, and I think,
Quick comment about I would urge people to use your CBSD VT email for this business. I know it's difficult to check more than one email. I failed at it for many years. But it does protect you if someone ever came to subpoena stuff to keep them out of your personal email box to some degree.
And can I just reiterate, it's true. I was probably one of the person that said something about texting my personal phone. Having had my personal email FOIA'd, which is Freedom of Information Act, not here, but it is a nightmare because they don't differentiate between what's public information and what is your school board information. It all goes. So, yeah.
Keep board business under CBSD. Can I just add something else? As a former board chair, or committee leader on different activities, it's frustrating when people do not respond to emails, so maybe if we could all get in the habit of, and I'm just as guilty as anyone else, get in the habit of maybe once a day at least logging into your CBSD email. Maybe it's like, first thing in the morning, again at noon or something, and then reply to Sandy if there's a request for RSVPing to attend meetings. Sandy needs to get in a head count of who's actually going to be there, even though you might assume that she knows. It's helpful to Sandy.
And I would just add to that, respond even if you can't make it. Because then she knows not to call you, or try to call you, or spend a lot of time trying to figure that out. So just respond even if it's, sorry, I can't make this one.
And I'm just as guilty as anyone with trying to do this. It's hard when you've got like 5 email accounts. Yeah.
okay,
Okay, so we all scolded ourselves.
all right. Okay, so reports from committees, communications and community connections. You
Yeah,
wanna-
so we had our meeting and I was elected chair, and what we put together, I think, is something that mirrors what we were doing earlier last year as a board, in the sense of looking at what our common topics are going to be during our board meetings and coming up with a series of topics for a monthly letter to send out. Start with the newspapers, and then once it's published in the local papers, it will be published on the Front Porch Forums and the Facebooks, and just to open up a line of communication between the community and the board. And part of that was also going into the community, being more proactive with an information table, and so we could just let the community, the board wants to educate outside, and not just the voters that have kids in the school system. Try to be more cognizant of the community as a whole. So.
So, and we've set up a Google Doc with a couple events that kind of living. We may add some more, but one of the philosophies is like, took your cue, where no one wants to make Colleen the Heinsberg communicator. So I would ask that for board members to go to other towns and help out other events, so that maybe Colleen will go to some of them, but, next week I'm going to Williston to do one as well. I'm not just going to the Shelburne events. So and we're not gonna schedule tons of events for everyone. We're trying to keep it reasonable. I know curriculum nights, I know at least in Shelburne, there's a little bit of a culture change we're gonna have to go through, because we're a policy board now and we're a bigger board and we represent a larger audience. but we're trying to think of like a small number of events just to get kicked off, and then not overtax our board members with tons of interaction. So with that, we'll move on to 512, which is Finance, Budget, and Facilities Report.
I think it pretty much is all captured in the meeting minutes. We went through the work plan and started talking a little bit about the budget and how that is going to look different this year, but there are no definitives, but really kind of looked back on the board discussion that was had in May on how, since it's a different type of board, the approach to budgeting is going to be a bit different, and kind of what the board roles and responsibilities would look like. We spent a little bit of time going through the very detailed healthcare recapture, which I know is later on in the agenda. Looked at the fourth quarter FMR and what is kind of the unaudited fund balance for CVSD now. And then took a deeper look at the transportation analysis, which I think we did in June, and the expectation was that our committee would come back with a recommendation in the fall, which is what you'll see coming up later on in the agenda. So that's Jean, or anyone else?
Okay, great. And 513, Human Resources and Labor Relations.
So we really had pretty much three items on the agenda. The support staff contract has to be reopened to renegotiate health care. That's driven by the changes in the plans that VHI is offering based on the Affordable Care Act. Mark was going to reach out to the association to get something going there. Got a deadline into this calendar year, so that'll have to be taken care of. There are 3 committees that were agreed to with the association when we completed the teacher's contract, and so we talked about what those were going to be doing and who was going to participate in those. One is to carry on a dialogue about health and safety concerns that the association had. Another is to look at our current salary structure, and then the third was to talk about co-curricular activities and how that affects the teachers and the contract. And then we've kind of had an ongoing dialogue for years about succession planning, talked about really several different factors there. One is just, emergency, if somebody leaves, how do we fill positions quickly? Then kind of short and long-term plans for how do we develop people, and then how might we address training needs if people want to advance themselves and move into management, as it were. So that was our meeting.
Thanks. So we'll move on to 5.2, which is CULT report, Central Office Leadership Team.
Thank you. Going into the 4th week of school, I can say that I visited 2 schools this week, and there's just as much energy, enthusiasm, and really lots of positive energy in all of these schools. I think it was one of the best beginnings that I've ever been associated with, and it seems like it's hanging on, so we're really proud of that. You've got the demographics there. I think I put in the report so you can see our numbers are higher at the high school, and I think that's just probably a reflection of some of our K-8s are finally leveling off, but they're sending their biggest 8th grade classes to the high school, so those numbers are either flat or down a little bit, but the high school numbers are higher. But it was a really excellent beginning. A couple of things that I would want you to pay attention to. Megan, the MTSS and the partnership with great schools at the high school. Maybe you could say a few words about that.
So most of you are aware that over the past couple of years, our focus in implementing MTSS is really around identifying our framework for what our system should look like, and then supporting individual schools in analyzing and moving themselves forward in that framework. And we're excited this year to have CVU in particular working with the Great Schools Partnership Organization, which they are out of Maine, but they're a nationally recognized group. And they will be supporting CVU as they analyze their supports and how kids access supports. But Great Schools Partnership has an especial focus on proficiency-based learning and personalization, and this is a really great way to integrate those two concepts. So how do we support all kids towards proficiency in this environment where we've shifted instruction? And so we're excited to be working with them. And they met with Adam and the leadership team last Tuesday, and they're sort of building an inquiry-based plan for their work for the year.
The Great Schools Partnership is the organization that was hired by the State Board of Education several years ago when they were looking at the school quality standards to transform them into educational quality standards. I worked with that group, and I thought they did a great job. They're really a class act. And Jeff, maybe you want to share the
Sure.
beginning of the school year, which was excellent, and I got a lot of positive emails from staff, and when I walked around the first day, heard from many of them that thought it was a really great beginning.
Yeah, before the students showed up, we had 4 professional learning days for teachers, the first of which was the district day, where we had approximately 400 teachers here. Started with convocation, where Elaine and Dave and others spoke to the group. And then the morning was filled with what we call Fill Your Bucket workshops. Over 50 teachers ran 33 different workshops for folks, a number of choices where they shared strategies they employ in the classroom, had great discussions, and collaboration being the theme for the day. In the afternoon, by grade bands, people worked on either the common learning targets and implementation of those, or a good portion of the K-4 teachers watched and discussed Resilience, a film that we'll watch and discuss on a smaller scale this evening. I would now say that about 2/3 of the faculty have been exposed to the Resilience piece that you'll be exposed to this evening. And then the day ended on our second annual trike race, the contest for between and among all the schools. And kudos to Charlotte, who went from worst to first.
Inspiring everybody.
And won the coveted golden helmet.
Trike race.
Trike race.
Those who haven't seen the trike race, can you describe?
Oh, sure. Each school has 20 riders. They each do 1 lap in the gym. We stole the tradition from the high school, where they do it every year in February. Everybody does 1 lap, and last year Williston was our inaugural winner. And this year, Charlotte, like I said, from the depths of despair, found a way. It's a lot of fun, great bonding event, and a good way to end the day and begin the year.
Can we find it on YouTube?
I don't know. I'll talk to Gary. I don't think this one's on YouTube. We had Elaine doing the first,
I cut a corner, didn't I?
yeah, the lap.
Not on purpose, I didn't realize, but didn't count anyway. It is a lot of fun, and it is a great way to end the week. You could just see there's so much spirit in the room, and it really brings everybody together, and people are really competitive. I mean, they really want to win. It's amazing, so it's fun. Thanks, Jeff. I think it's pretty extraordinary that there were 50 Fill Your Bucket sessions. People, volunteer to do extra work in the summer to put something together that they're going to do for their colleagues. Obviously, they're going to spend a little time, and I think it says a lot about the work that Jeff has done with them and behind the scenes to have that happen. So thank you for your work. Any questions about anything else in the report?
I was curious I wasn't sure how many board members were aware of the facilities sort of shuffle around that we did with people.
Reorganization?
Yeah.
Also excellent work. Thank you very much.
Yep.
I've been here for 10 weeks.
I know.
So we, this board approved a central office property services manager to try to bring all the property services groups together. So we interviewed for that position and hired Kurt Prue, who's the facilities director for CVU. We decided to bring him on half-time instead of full-time and sort of share the work, because we really have excellent directors at all of our facilities. And so they've kind of collaborated to become a district leadership team, which I think is working very well so far. So, and a little less expensive for the district, so that's where we're going to try to find some of the money. But And Chris Giard, who's the Shelburne Facilities Director, has taken over the open position in Charlotte. So he's kind of stretched to pick up a whole extra building. While I'm at it, I would like to thank the Charlotte staff has had a kind of a rocky start with a lot of facilities work that needed to be done, and then some transportation issues that needed to be dealt with, and everything seems to have gone smoothly, so thank you very much. But, yeah, so anyways, that's what we've done with facilities, and now they're really getting to work as a team to share resources around the district, which is what we want to do.
So is Kurt gonna stay at CVU for halftime? And
Yep.
Central, okay.
Yep.
All right.
I just have to share that at the lead meetings, that's the once a month district-wide administrator meeting, we always start with some little activity to break the ice. And this time, what was on the table was to come up with a dilemma that was, would you rather this or that, right? And so Charlotte said, would you rather start the school year short a bus or without a cafeteria? Real life dilemma. So it's good when you can laugh at
That's
the
true.
stuff that you had to really work on to make do with.
All right. And how will we do principals reports? We just,
Are there any questions?
Yeah.
And there are a couple of principles here. So you can see we formatted it so they look almost exactly alike. There's one that's a little bit different. We're interested in, like, how is it readable for you? Is it easy to get the information? Did we highlight the right things? And any questions that you might have?
no? Okay,
Okay?
great.
What do you want to mention?
So, before you leave today, we will be asking you to fill out a form, which is the exit card that we'll have for each meeting. We've redone them, so they look a little differently than they did last time. There's a section on the agenda, on the meeting itself, on the reports, on the presentation, on the professional learning topic. Obviously, there's no presentation tonight, so you can easily just go, but we do pay attention to this. When we debrief this meeting tomorrow, we will look at the responses and we'll have a conversation about, like, is that something that we want to make an adjustment to, or is it something we want to bring back to the board? So I'm going to pass them out just so we don't forget to do those
Plus, people may want to fill them out as they get
as they
to.
go along, right? So in the future, we'll do those at the beginning of the meeting, we'll pass them out. Just a reminder.
Did you pass this around to me? No.
Oh, because you were talking, so I just gave it to Colleen, and she didn't bring it back.
All right, so moving on, we have no presentation, so we'll start with 7.1, our learning topic on resilience.
And I just want to frame, the theme for the year is resilience. And that comes from some of the conversations that we had last year and couple of the common topics we had with David Melnick and the year before with Bob Bick, the panel discussion. It really is in response to what all of us are seeing, not just here in the Champlain Valley School District, but everywhere in the state and at a national level. We are seeing more and more kids come to school with more challenges that we have to face. They're new and different challenges, and so that's one point I want to make. This is in response to what you told us you wanted to hear more about, how we're dealing with this. But it's also because the second point I want to make is it's easy to imagine that this is other people's kids, right? When you're going to watch the little clips here, you could imagine that it's someplace else because the filming got done someplace else. But we could change the clips and it would be us. And in fact, the study that this film is based on is us, right? It was done in can you remind me, what's the? Kaiser Permanente, professional people, yeah. So the first study that they did, the first survey that they did, is like people in professional roles and talking about the challenges that they have, or the challenges they had in their own childhoods and in their own upbringing. So it's really current. We, when we were planning this, thought we would take the film, which is an hour long, and take clips from it and piece it together, and then stop and have some conversations. And it turns out that you can't even get the film They're at the town libraries, and every single town library has already got it out on loan. So it's really current. I think people find that it really resonates. So this is tonight to set the tone, and then we will have teachers come and talk to you. We will have Cassandra Townsend, who is doing some work for the district around this, come and talk to you. So we're gonna focus on the kid level, the school level, the district level, in all its permeations. And we're hoping that this sets a good baseline for the work that we'll do this year. Yeah.
If I can, statewide, Vermont is one of the leaders looking at adverse childhood experiences and realizing how it impacts our agency of human services. It's, to me, such a tangible tool to get at what people are struggling with, and it just makes so much sense. I don't think it's just the new gimmick, the new wave.
Right.
It just, for me anyway, you'll see, but I appreciated having it at CVU, and the panel that we had was really strong, and we can talk more about it, but
It really isn't a new thing. It's an evolution and a transformation of what we've known for a long time. Think about the 40 developmental assets, right? This is kind of looking at that from a little bit of a different lens, so. Okay? Thanks.
Your segue to developmental assets is another thing that we'll cover in here, because they're very much related. So again, just reiterating, we're trying to build some context around sort of what's happening for kids and families in our district, and more importantly, what are we doing to respond to it. And one of the things that, when the high school was viewing the video, Adam had brought in a panel of folks, and one of the things that Adam said to start this off, which I think is really relevant for this conversation, is that the film is the biology of stress and the science of hope, and the framework is that, yes, stress, toxic stress has significant impacts on brain development and health, but we also know enough about the brain now that we can adjust that curve. We can change the trajectory for kids, and that's a part of the conversation that sometimes we don't hear when we just focus on trauma that kids are facing. So I think that that's an important frame. And you folks, Christine introduced herself in the beginning. Most of you know her from CY, and she has some additional things on her plate this year with a new role, so she and I are going to go back and forth. Our goal is to show you some clips and then stop and talk. We'll probably break you up into groups to do some discussion and then bring you back. Any audience members who want to join in the conversation are welcome. We've got some principals who may be able to share what's happening in classrooms, and we'll see how far we get with what we have. If there's time, there's an additional clip about, more specifically, some things that happen in the brain related to stress. But we will start by just showing the trailer of Resilience, because if you, since you couldn't watch it today, most of your local libraries, although they're all signed out, they do have this. And several have shown it to their communities, and it really is a powerful video. It's not a video, it's a documentary film. It's an hour long, so sign it out if you can.
And if you want to sign it out, plan on about a 2-week window before you can actually physically get it in your hands.
Is that loud enough?
We all like to think of childhood as this time of joy and innocence. But, I mean, for many of us, it's just not true.
When you grew up in these type of situations, it's not something you talk about. I know I did it.
The first thing that we found is that adverse childhood experiences are common.
Child may not remember, but the body remembers.
incredible gee whiz effect. You mean adverse childhood experiences cause heart disease and lung disease and liver and cancer?
Exposure to trauma affects children's developing brains. The impact is on your behavior, it's on your heart, it's on your DNA. Like, how do you deal with all that?
Don't reach out when you used to.
We have a whole new body of knowledge now that could open up what we have up till now been seen as intractable, unsolvable problems.
No child should be punched or kicked.
If you can get the science into the hands of the general population, they will invent very wise actions.
Do you feel like any of the interventions have been making a difference?
They made all the difference in the world.
It's there, it's possible, and a defeatist attitude is completely disconnected from what 21st century science is telling us, and we should be going after that like a bear.
So one of the things, Elaine mentioned the ACEs study, which was done with a group of individuals who were insured by Kaiser Permanente out in California. They were a primarily Caucasian audience, upper middle class, and the numbers of ACEs that were exhibited, adverse childhood experiences, and there's a list of 10 ACEs, were the same that you see anywhere else in the country across any other population. There's not a dramatic change from one demographic to another necessarily, and the impact is potentially how you manage that impact may be different based on access to resources that you have, but the impact is still the same regardless, and the exposure to them is the same. You can also, there are a couple of great TED Talks, and there was recently a TED radio hour that was done on resilience, a number of different clips that are really, really interesting. So I would encourage people to follow up on that, and I'd be happy to share that information afterwards. That ACEs study brought to light what we've always known sort of in social science. We talk in human services about resilience all the time. Developmental assets is a concept that has been researched and talked about for years and years. What this study did was it brought it into medical science, and it really directly tied those things, those experiences with physical changes in the body. Which was a real aha, particularly in the medical field for physicians, seeing what their role in building resilience is for students. And so some of what's come out of this is really creating wraparound services that involves not only physicians, but OTs, PTs, social workers, community organizations, and having everybody talking to each other, talking the same language, and engaged in identifying what's best for an individual child. So we're going to show the next clip that we have for you is specifically on the ACEs and what they are and how that plays out in a person's life.
What does your parents' divorce have to do with your risk for heart disease? If your mother had a drinking problem when you were growing up, are you more likely to suffer from depression as an adult? Here's what you should know about ACEs. ACEs stand for Adverse Childhood Experiences, extremely stressful events that can happen to a child growing up. Some experiences are so stressful that they can alter brain development, as well as the immune system, increasing the risk of lifelong health and social problems in adulthood. The term comes from the Adverse Childhood Experiences Study, landmark research that shed new light on the root cause of everything from stroke and liver disease to substance abuse and mental illness. In the late 1990s, an epidemiologist from the Centers for Disease Control and a preventive medicine doctor at Kaiser Permanente set out to understand the association between childhood experience and lifelong health. They asked over 17,000 people in the Kaiser Health Plan in San Diego about their health history as well as difficult questions about their experiences growing up. And Felitti tallied up 10 different kinds of adversity in this largely middle-class and college-educated population. They were stunned to see how common ACEs were. 21% of all respondents were sexually abused as children. 19% grew up with someone who suffered mental illness. 28% had been physically abused. And 2 out of 3 respondents had experienced at least one ACE. The researchers next looked at how someone's ACE score, or the number of adversities they experienced, related to a wide array of serious health and social problems. They saw that the more ACEs someone had, the greater their risk for poor outcomes compared with someone with no ACEs. Someone with an ACE score of 4 had twice the risk of heart disease and cancer. Someone with an ACE score of 5 had an 8 times greater chance of being an alcoholic. And those with an ACE score of 6 or more, on average, died 20 years earlier. With every major problem they looked at in the ACE study, the risk went up for each additional adverse experience in childhood. As Dr. Robert Anda says, what's predictable is preventable. It's important to remember that ACEs are not destiny. ACEs are a tool for understanding the health of a population as a whole. For individuals, an ACE score can be a tool for understanding their own risk for health and social problems, and empower them to make changes for themselves and their children. ACEs tend to get passed down from generation to generation and are common across all income levels, races, and cultures. But increasingly, people of all different professions and backgrounds are coming together to discuss how ACEs affect their communities. They're finding new ways to treat and prevent ACEs. Many doctors are starting to screen their patients for ACEs as part of their medical history. More schools are becoming trauma-informed, considering the source of problem behavior when disciplining their students, instead of immediately suspending or expelling them. To learn more about interrupting the cycle of adversity and improving health and well-being for the next generation, please visit kpjrfilms.co.
Okay, so for the next part, I'm gonna tell you what we're gonna do, and then you're gonna break up into groups. We're gonna have the board break up into 3 groups. You'll count off by 3s. Yeah, that should work. The rest of us will sort of float around. We're gonna spend about 10 minutes just within your group, just discussing 2 questions that I'll read, and then I'll actually put them up on the screen so that you can refer to them. Have a discussion, kind of moderate your own discussion. At the end, we'll come back and have each group just share kind of either the key theme that you were talking about or something in your conversation that really resonated. And this part is really about the ACEs, what adverse childhood experiences are. So the 2 questions are going to be, what's a health or social issue that you were surprised to see linked to ACEs? And then what are some examples of situations where someone could have asked what happened instead of what's wrong with you when we approach kids and families who are struggling? So, Kevin, you want to start? We're going to count off by 3s.
1, 2,
3. Good.
3.
1.
2.
3. 1.
All right, so we can do, you guys can kind of stand, you're only going to be doing this for 5 or so minutes, so you can even just stand and talk if you'd rather be up and moving. So 1s can go here, and 2s over there, and 3s over there. And anyone else who wants to join and kind of float around that. And in a second, I'm just going to put the questions up on the board. We'll give you about 10 minutes, and then we will come back together.
Very delicate, because sometimes the pretty sad fathers and angry all meet. I'm like, what a description.
Really small.
All right, I'm over there with these guys.
Have you seen trauma-informed instruction in or
Not at all.
no?
Yeah, nothing.
Okay, we're gonna have to so we're gonna come together. You can probably take your seats.
Ways to help you with this.
So, to make sure that we have a chance to see the other two clips and do a little bit more discussion, the second half of the discussion we'll do as a full group. But if one person from each group can just share one theme from what you were just talking about.
Go ahead, Colin.
We'll go first, and Bryn had the best idea.
Gee, thanks.
It was a great idea.
It's not an idea, it's just it was a recognition that our policies don't support doing any of this, right? Our policies over expulsions and suspensions are pretty set, and it's set in statute, and it's very prescriptive. There's no ability to ask what happened. I mean, we
As a
really-
board member, we
as a-
can't ask.
Right, the way that our disciplinary hearings and our policy is
But
set
the
up.
professionals in the building can.
So we need to, I think, as a group, to whatever extent we can, we need to look at those types of policies and see, okay, how could we incorporate some of this? And I don't know how much we can change them, but I think that's right now we're at odds with it.
Based on the power of this and what we see.
Right.
Right,
Oh, we should practice what we're preaching.
yeah.
I would say that's one level where you might want to ask a question, but also then there's procedures, and I would argue that we are doing a lot of this and have built a lot of this into our procedures. And that when it gets to you, you may not have experienced the breadth of the procedures that we've followed. But it's still a fair question to ask about the policy level.
Well, that could be a board education piece.
Right.
Okay, seeing my fellow board members are keeping their heads down. So we had a discussion about how important understanding these concepts are and to ensure that we have mechanisms for helping expand the discussion in the community about ACEs and the impact, the longitudinal impact on our communities. We also had discussion about what's the role of the board and focused on policy, budget, leadership directives, that's the area that we can have an impact. Kevin or Russ or Joan, you want to add?
Nice job.
Okay.
I guess that would be us. My group doesn't even look like he knows he's the last group. So we talked about an awareness, as you did, of the criteria of ACEs, but I think where we ended up is the support systems. And like once it's there, once you've identified it, what is our role and what can we do? Because it's one thing to identify it and be able to support it internally, but then what other things how can we empower the student, the family, the teacher? Or do we? I don't know.
In the role of the board. Knowing board is policy, budget.
Yes.
Leadership.
So, just to build on that, one of the things that I heard in the groups is just an acknowledgement that so much of this comes from, or it feels like, and does come from external factors. And so the next two things that we're going to watch in quick succession is really getting at that question of, well, now what do we do with this? Knowing that many of these are external factors. But one of the key things, at least for me, and AHA coming out of the the documentary is this is about breaking the cycle, because these are intergenerational. You know, if parents have 6 or more ACEs, their kids are probably going to have 6 or more ACEs, and it just keeps going. So we're going to watch a short clip about the resilience part of this, and then we're going to show a short clip about the developmental assets, do a little bit more discussion, and then we'll kind of close in a way that hopefully launches what we'll do in October.
Resilience is about overcoming adversity. It's about how you think and how you view the world. When something bad happens to you, do you see it as a catastrophe, or do you see it as an opportunity? Are you able to tell the difference between something that's a real tiger versus something that just feels like a tiger? Because stress is designed into our bodies so that we can deal with a tiger that's going to attack us, right? And the key is that you have to be able to tell the difference between something that can really chew your face off, or just feels like it might. The resilience mindset can tell the difference between something real and something that only worries you. Unconditional love gives human beings the security that allows them to move forward and to take chances. That's the bottom line of being able to handle almost anything. I am loved, I am valued, and people know who I am inside. That allows people to thrive through good and bad times, and that's what resilience is.
For about 40 years now at Search, we've been using research to ask young people about their lives, their families, and their communities. There are 40 assets. They are both internal and external assets. The external assets tell us about the needs that young people have for support from adults in their communities, about the kind of activities they need to develop, the kind of boundaries that they need in their lives. And the internal assets tell us about the values that will affect their behavior. It tells us about the skills, etc., and things that they really care about and that they're committed to.
Asset number 1, I get lots of family support. Asset number 10, I feel safe at home.
Asset number 39, I have a strong sense of purpose in life.
Asset number 14, I have a lot of adult role models. Asset number 25, I like to read books for fun. Asset number 17, I spend a lot of time doing creative activities. Asset number 34, we're comfortable with people from different backgrounds.
Asset number 28, I have integrity and I stand up for my beliefs.
Asset number 35, I can resist pressure from bad influences.
What Search Institute has found is that young people with few assets, 10 or fewer, are very likely to engage in many forms of high-risk behavior, like alcohol and other drug use, too early sexual expression, and violence. And at the same time, young people with very few assets are less likely to engage in some very positive behaviors, like succeeding in school, affirming diversity in their midst, taking care of their own health. Now, in contrast, those young people with many of the developmental assets, let's say more than 30, are much less likely to engage in high-risk behaviors and are much more likely to engage in positive behaviors like school success.
This research is a wake-up call. It's not about pointing fingers. It's not about who's there to blame. It's about taking action. It's about looking at what you and I can do to make a difference. It's asking parents, teachers, community leaders, congregational members to take action to helping kids succeed. And even just as important, it's asking kids to take responsibility for their own behavior.
So again, just to point out, the developmental assets and the ACEs research are two really different things that say the same thing. And we've worked with developmental assets for years. It's probably not unfamiliar to most of you in the room. And what I love about the developmental assets, and it speaks directly to the ACEs study and what we can do as a group, is the ideas are tangible. The assets that we can build in kids' lives are really tangible things that you can do in every single interaction that you have with a kid. Whether it's your own child or a student you see walking down the hall when you're walking through CVU. So what you have in front of you is a primer on developmental assets. And this shows some of the really clear research on the greater the number of assets a student has, the better off they're going to do in life, the greater the likelihood they are to succeed. And what we really know is that when we respond with compassion and attention to those who have experienced trauma in their lives, we can actually help support them to turn the curve on those issues. And so, like Megan was talking about, breaking the cycle, it enables us to really guide students and families out of that traumatic experience and into a more successful life. So we have a couple of other, and I guess one other point I want to make too is that resilience doesn't mean getting over an issue. Those issues are ours to live with for the rest of our lives. And he talked a little bit about what resilience means. It means being able to recognize that it's not a tiger, even though in the moment it might feel like a tiger. And so what we're looking for is making sure that the adults in the lives of students are buffering students and helping role model appropriate behaviors in those moments to give them the coping skills necessary. So questions for you. Let's see. Let's do this one because I know we're running short on time. What are the ways that you identify, after hearing this and in your conversations tonight, that you're seeing this happen in your schools and communities, where people are intentionally building resilience in the students or youth that they're encountering?
I may not be answering your question. I'm answering the question I want to.
Go right ahead.
So I'm thinking of things like yoga. I mean, so many schools are starting to introduce yoga, mindfulness, meditation into their classrooms. And I'm, as part of the building it into the culture of the school to give kids tools. And I'm like, I don't know what those practices are in CVSD, and I'm curious about it, and you don't need to answer it now. But I'm thinking as a board member, at some point, some people in the community might not like that because of it being perceived as doctrination or something like that. To me, that's a discussion that we could continue further at another time. But I know many schools across the country are instituting practices to help kids develop different behaviors.
You
or give
totally
them
answered
tools.
my question. Because mindfulness is something that's happening in most, if not all, of our schools in one way or another. And the intentional instruction in that.
And I just know if you label it yoga or something else, sometimes some people in the community have a hard time with it. I don't know.
It's just incredible how far, I'm sorry, Joan, go ahead. No. You raised your hand, I just interrupted.
I think what we do with relationship building, and every student has at least a purposeful adult in their life, and hopefully many more, but at least an advisor or a core teacher or something, because I think there are things you can see in one another. If I know someone really well, I can say, what's up, something's off, and I think that's what we do that is right now.
And if I could just quickly follow up, as a
If you
board
raise
member,
your
I would
hand.
want to know. I'm impulsive and just interrupt. I'll work on it. A question I would have is, how many kids in our school have a person that they have a regular contact with year after year after year?
So we're actually working on answering that question.
Yeah, I'm not, you don't need to answer it now, but I would want to know that.
But later in my little script here, so I'm going to jump ahead. We're actually planning to administer the Search Institute's Attitudes and Behavior Survey, which does look specifically at the 40 developmental assets. And so students will be asked to identify which they have in their lives, which they actively experience. And different from the Youth Risk Behavior Survey, it gives us an opportunity to look at tangible ways that we can build those assets in students, as opposed to looking at the risk behaviors and not knowing what assets or missing assets contributed to that. And so, hopefully by spring, I would be able to come back here and share some of that information with you in a way that let us look at particularly our 6th through 12 student body, 6th grade through 12th grade student bodies, and see where they're at, where they feel like they're at in those areas.
And a couple of the groups had been talking about, even back to ACEs, how do we know? Is there a way to screen our student body population? And that is a very difficult thing to do when you're talking about ACEs. But when you flip that and instead focus on what are the assets that they have, external, internal, and how do we build from that, that is information that we can gather.
So are you saying in that case, you would look at assets, and if there's significant missing assets, you can address how to fill those holes?
Correct.
Okay.
Exactly. And what are there patterns of missing assets in our, in certain parts of our organization? So there's lots of different ways that we can kind of augment what we already know when we gather YRBS data in a way that's practical. Dave, did you have one other comment, and then I'll kind of launch us into what will happen next month?
So my comment was just that the fascinating transformation of this topic, because I think it was 4 years ago, I was in a early meeting and Russ was like, why would we do this? This seems like scope creep. This is, we're talking about something
Mission
that
creep.
wasn't instructional. Mission creep, yeah. Mission creep for the school. And, back then it was like, well, we were just starting to learn that the sooner we correct problems in issues in youth, the benefits to keeping those folks out of incarceration or other risk behaviors, the better for all of us. And I joke on the superficial level, all these habits of mine that kids are learning at younger ages, when I go around to all the schools and talk, I wish I had those tools when I broke up with my first girlfriend. Because
Sure wasn't the other way around?
I was hoping Russ wouldn't catch that.
Resist.
It's like, there's a continuum of how these things can help. So that was my comment. And I always got to make sure Russ has a chance to get me back when I use him as the example. So.
Perfect.
Yep.
So I guess just in closing, back 2 years ago when Bob came, he was really building the community context for us. What's happening in our community? Last year when we had the panel with Dave Melnick and Charlotte McCorkle from First Call and Rita Markley from COTS, that's really about what's our regional Chittenden County context and how is that starting to bleed over into schools. This is, again, picking up that thread. What does all that mean for the kids in our building? Starting in October, we will shift gears to now what are we doing about this. So in October, you'll hear from Joelle Van Lent, who works on her own now, but was a colleague of Dave Melnick's. She's going to talk about what is the path that schools can take to become trauma-informed, how do you impact that? And then over the course of the year, you'll hear about what's happening right now in our schools and systems around addressing all of the issues we talked today. So, repeating what Elaine said, but you'll hear from Cassandra Townsend. Christine will be back around to talk in a little bit more depth about her expanded role and all of the different components of that. And we'll hear from teachers and teams and just individuals in our system doing good work around this.
And just on that point, again, there's no answer here, but just to add to that, when we were in the negotiations committee, one of the things we heard very clearly from the teachers, and I want to recognize that, is their personal safety, both from students that are high trauma students and parents that are coming in. So I feel that the work we do in this vein should also really keep in mind how to better empower the teachers, not only to help the students, but to create safer space for themselves in their workplace.
No, I appreciate that connection, because that is part of why 3/4 of our staff have seen the video, and there's a plan to have more. That's why at this point, all of our schools in some capacity have had Dave Melnick come in and talk about what trauma is and what the impact is. And so that's kind of the professional learning for the teachers to help reframe them, understand, and then have a toolbox to know what to do with the kids in their classroom. Colleen?
And I'm wondering what data points we'll have that we can share with our public communications, and I'm looking at Barbara right now. So I'm thinking, for example, when we get to the point of building budget, communicating with the community, we'll need data such as, 25% of our students have experienced X number of incidences of trauma, blah, 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 whatever. So we'll need data to share with the community, and whatever data you're using to do the work that you do in the schools, maybe do some filters and bring pieces back to the board, because we'll need to expand this with our communication when it comes to talking about what we're doing in our schools and budgets and so forth.
It's funny, I just made a note saying what's being used as a baseline. Like, how are we knowing all of these interventions are going to make a difference? Like, what are we using to start that at? And like you said, that doesn't have to be answered now, but I'd be curious.
That is one of the things that, an advantage of Cassandra Townsend, who Charlotte folks will know who she is, but she is heading up CVSD behavior systems, and she works with school districts about how to look at their, this is only one piece of data, but how do you look at the sort of social emotional learning data in that building? She will have the lens to be able to look at that as an SD, which is one, not the only piece of data, but it is a sort of baseline to help measure that. All right, I think that's it. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
One thing I had mentioned in the group discussion was that I think it's important for students to recognize that these ACEs, these sources of trauma, actually happen quite frequently. I mean, according to the survey done in the film, 2/3 of the subjects had experienced at least one ACE. So I think if it's possible, it'd be really eye-opening for students to conduct a similar survey at CVU. I mentioned that I see my life as peachy. I don't really have any significant problems or any significant sources of trauma that would lead to major problems later in life. And most of my friends don't have any big problems like that either. And I think that for many students at CVU, to recognize that, perhaps a majority of students have experienced at least one ACE would really change their perspective, be quite eye-opening.
Yeah, that's a great point, because it's just as important for us as individuals to not think what's wrong with me and instead think what happened. It's just as important for us to think that about ourselves as it is for others to think that about us. So that's a great point.
Great.
Okay.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, so we'll move on to discussion matters, 8.1, community forums. So did you have some sort of a plan with respect to budget? Or is this just an open-ended?
No, I think community group can chime in. It's really just a matter of if there's an interest for the board to reach out to the community before we jump into the heat of it. It probably starts to need to be planned and scheduled now, because they should probably happen in October. And I believe some communities did pre-budget kind of discussions with the community, but not all. So that was really the question for the board.
Yeah, so there were some districts that I was under the impression did, but did not.
Oh.
But I did hear from the public that they wanted them. So I think it would be important to give the public an opportunity to come to each school and give us their hopes and dreams and concerns on the budget, so that we could maintain that connection. It does not need to be the full board at every meeting, but it could be a couple people and at least one person from that town working with the principal, doing the, sort of the budget forum like we did at Shelburne, which was, you know, give us your hopes and dreams, that type of thing. Discussion?
So does it need to be done at each school in each town? Could it be done, say, here or some other, you know, central location, and maybe geared towards, you know, K-8 for a couple of them, and high school or you know, just in general? And honestly, maybe we'll have, with fewer events, maybe we'll have better turnout at those fewer events. I mean, you know, my experience has been that they're not well attended, even when we're holding them on the same night as the PTO meetings, and that it's kind of been the usual suspects. I mean, the you know, same people show up year after year to them. So is there something we can do to change things up that might, you know, get a bigger audience, or you know, as I say, if we do it fewer times, but have a bigger group when we actually do them?
I feel like when Act 46 was being discussed and then promoted, there was kind of a subcontext that even though we were CVSD, there was still going to be an opportunity for the communities to have input to their schools, even though we're all now their school. And actually, I think in the Act 46 report, it talked about each school having its own little budget, a mechanism for the principals to get feedback from the community. And I agree, they aren't very well attended, and it's usually the same people. But I feel like at least this year, we didn't do anything last year, right? I feel like this year, we at least need to offer up the opportunity. And if people don't take it, then we can revisit it next year. But I feel like, you know, we didn't, if you're hearing from people that they would like the opportunity to give input, and I think it should be K-12. I don't think we should do it K-8, because there's a big disconnect. And we all send our kids to 9 to 12, so I would keep it K-12.
Why do you think there's a big disconnect?
Because when people talk about, in the past, when people would talk about, when you'd have your budget forums, it would always be about K-8. When they talked about the size of the budget, it was always the K-8 budget. It was never the 9-12 budget. Now we're one big budget, and we can't parse out, well, this percentage is going to K-8 and this percentage is going to 9-12. So I think if we get people starting to think about K-12.
I guess, you know, what I was thinking when I suggested that is programs that are specific to K-8. You know, we usually heard something about foreign languages, you know, being added at lower levels, or, you know, more math, or, you know, whatever it might be. So, you know, if we're going to do it with a limited, you know, somewhat limited amount of time, do you want to, you know, get deeper into certain subjects as opposed to, you know, less time to talk about more subjects?
Yeah. Perhaps a practical piece would be if part of this is to allow an opportunity for the public to have a discussion with their principal, their local principal. Adam can't do, probably can't do 4 of them. So, and the public could see this as we're not just, haven't just lost the ability to talk to my, you know, 5-7 school board members, but I've also have lost this opportunity to talk directly with the principal if we just did it here. That was my other thought.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, unless you did a roundtable, right? Like we do our board meetings, right? We could do one
That would
big
be
event
interesting.
here.
That would be interesting.
So you would have Adam
Yeah.
here for 9 through 12, and then you would break out into your, each town would have their room with their principals. So you would.
That would be
You
interesting.
could get your,
Yeah.
and it would all be on one night as opposed to 5. I don't know.
So what would make up the roundtable? That's an intriguing idea, but what,
I think it would be more the 9 through 12 piece would be, because Adam's dealing with 5 towns, and assuming you get people from all 5 towns here, that would be a chance for the K-8 to hear the 9-12 piece, I guess.
yeah.
And then you would break out into your individual groups.
That would be really interesting, because we give them an overview of, like, basically give them a precursor to the budget presentation and say, this is, you know, district-wide, this is what we're doing for this and this and this, and then break out into individual towns and,
You'll still get your independent or individual input with your own principal.
yeah,
I don't know.
sounds like a good idea. Yeah.
I wonder if there's a lot of people have conflicts with their schedules. Is there another opportunity to take advantage of technology and have some kind of survey tool that's available to people to provide input? And it would mean, someone constructing a set of questions, but, a lot of people just can't come.
Yeah.
Can I ask a question to Greg? Did he leave?
But you can, go
But I
ahead.
guess, I was just wondering, as a principal, or if any of the principals here that have gotten contacted, like, how are the public,
You can ask Stephanie.
how does the public contact you? Insofar as if they have a budget question about your particular school?
I haven't really experienced it yet as a lead. So I think in the past, it really has been through board meetings.
So if that's the case through board meetings, to Russ's point, we're not inundated with information. I mean, but there are people, so I'm thinking that roundtable idea might be a great use of time. We present the budget as a whole and then have an opportunity to break off into.
Well, it wouldn't be presenting the budget as a whole, because we wouldn't have the budget, so this
The
is.
process.
The
pre-budget.
overview of the process.
The overview of the process, and what are the programs that we have?
Right.
Like in a big picture kind of look.
Yeah, that's a good point, because it did come up in discussion in the community and in the committee meeting about how we wanted to do this, and the roundtable idea is intriguing because, you have to remember, we're just starting off with this, and the public is just starting off with this as a new way of interacting with us too, and spending a little time up front, going over the basics, who we are, why we consolidated. Not take a lot of time, but just set the context. What's gonna happen in the budget process now that we're all together, and now we need to hear from you, the community, to help us get through this too.
And I wonder too, because Lynn, to your point about, there's some people that feel like it didn't happen last year. But I would argue that it did happen, in the sense of we came together quick and we had to do this budget very quickly. But we had a host of meetings up and until the point of that. Did we call them, budget forums? I don't think so, but they were meetings that discussed budgets that were publicly warned.
Right.
So maybe that was messaging too, right? We didn't say budget forum or, open house, come voice your opinion. This is in our time crunch of last year that it had to be done. So this year, I think we do have some flexibility to do that planning and to do that communication. And even the letters that we spoke about in the communications committee is trying to lay some of the groundwork for that. Who we are as an organization and what are those budget components.
Okay.
I would just say, don't underestimate the value of being able to say at the end of the process, at the beginning of the process, we invited you to come in to share with you what we were doing and for you to provide input. I think that's always a good way to behave. And if you can do that in one night, that's great, because I think that really consolidates the resources. But I think it is really important to be able to do that. That honestly, if they show up in droves, fabulous. But if only like half a dozen people come, it's like half a dozen people came, and you can say, we invited you and we were there. And we gave the same presentation to the 6 as we would have given to the 25,000 if they'd all shown up.
Okay. That's good.
So I'm hearing broad support for a consolidated one-night forum
Same here.
with breakout. Is that?
Yep.
Okay.
So I think the communications and community outreach committee will sort of
How about a
roll with
date?
this.
Supplemented by an online tool.
So,
Yeah.
do we have a regular meeting? Do we start budget meetings in November?
November 19th is a regular board meeting. We don't start any non-regular board meetings till December 5th.
Oh, okay. One thought is to replace
That's the
committee night with this,
The 21st, I'm sorry, the
the
Tuesday.
opposite Tuesday in November. instead of having our committee night, we could do this
So the
presentation?
first Tuesday of November.
November 7th?
Ooh. It's my birthday.
Oh, we'll have cake.
I ain't gonna be
All the
here.
more reason for all of us to be together.
Your family's not celebrating.
So, with the exception of Russ, maybe, that would be a good way to get all of
We'll
us.
celebrate with you.
Yeah, because people have this on their calendar already.
Yeah.
That's,
So we'll
Yes,
just
thank
That's
you.
what I
gather
meant.
an additional finance committee meeting before that date.
I think so.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that would be November 7th. Which is Library Bond Election Night in Shelburne. Not a lot in any other
An
towns.
exciting day.
It is. Exciting.
Two big things.
And it's only gonna be about,
Three big things.
yeah. So,
No election, right?
yep. All right. Let's go with that.
That's good.
Okay, so move on to 8.2 and policy committee. What's one thing we're missing is a policy committee and a,
Yeah, so, and I don't think it needs to be a large committee, there's a couple people. We'll probably meet not on committee night, probably first thing in the mornings, there'd be principal involved. I mean, you've all seen the policy that comes through, that we put together a work plan, and there's some work to do there. You don't I guess we probably don't need to make a decision tonight, who wants to be on it, we can do that committee night, the next committee night. But, I would like there to be some support for there to actually be a policy committee. And I would advocate that it doesn't really need to be very large. There's only 12 people on the board. I know everybody really loves policy, but,
did I hear Adam Bunting wants to be part of it? Is that what I heard?
He'll be one of the administrator reps, yes.
Okay,
yeah.
We'll have two administrator reps, K-8 and 912.
good.
I was just going to say, I support that idea, having served on the policy committee before, having a small group go through, and having administrator, central office representation, principal representation, board representation, you kind of hit, Ray's done it too.
And it's something that should evolve all the time. I mean, we were talking about it tonight. It should be something that we're looking at all the time.
Yeah. So Ray, do you like that construct that? Yeah.
So, I don't know how far you'd like to take that this evening.
I think, if there are folks who would love to be part of this committee, we could have folks volunteer and,
Who's
send a
not
note-
here tonight?
Send a note to Mark, and then, if you, and we'll remind the folks that are not here tonight that they can also volunteer. And then
Could
just
we
it
get
started.
a prompt to the board?
I was just going to say, I think we'll send a prompt to
Yeah.
make sure that.
And perhaps the meeting schedule?
Well, that would be, I wouldn't set up a meeting schedule without checking with who's on the committee.
Well,
If
it's
gonna
probably
be
most
8
difficult
o'clock.
for the board, for the principals,
Yes.
right?
But in the, if by a prompt we mean, we're gonna do this, here's the idea, looking for some volunteers.
Right.
What you envision in terms of meeting frequency and timing, if it's, every other Thursday or, Thursday once a month at 8 AM or something like that, I think that would be helpful in people
Yeah.
trying to figure out whether they can fit it in.
I was envisioning once a month. And scheduling, I was gonna, since it's going to be smallish, I was gonna schedule around, it was a small enough group that we could schedule around everybody's schedule. But, we could pick a day, say every third Thursday at 8 o'clock in the morning, something like that. I'm happy to do that.
Okay. Sounds good. All right, 8.3, the VSBA conference attendance and resolutions. So, all right. So in our packets,
It's just for discussion
Was-
if you need it.
yeah. So the annual VSBA conference is coming up, middle of October. Traditionally, we've sent someone there, at least one person, sometimes two, with a proxy to vote for our board. They've changed the rules every supervisory union or district has one vote now. And also, there are a number of resolutions that are proposed, which have been included on postage stamp size text boxes here, but they were also in your package if you want to look at them as well. And we were hoping that people would have read through these and had some comments or feelings strongly, yay or nay, on each of these resolutions, so that we could send someone to the conference. Yes?
If I could provide a little context.
Yep.
So it used to be that any board member who showed up had a vote. And because of the change of our supervisory union, supervisory districts, it's now one vote per supervisory union, supervisory district. Any board member can attend the annual meeting. And in fact, if you're, I don't know if you can or not, I'll have to check on that. Probably not. I don't remember seeing student reps in the business meeting, but that's an interesting question. So the business meeting, you have to be a board member to go into it. You don't have to be registered to attend the conference. That's just the FAQs going through the change, which is why the VSBA and VSBA board is asking individual boards to have a discussion about the resolutions prior to the annual meeting as a board, which is why Dave put it on tonight's agenda.
Yep.
So whoever represents this board gets a vote, but anyone can speak up at the meeting if you have a difference of opinion. But, I don't think there's anything that's within the resolutions that's really our board would differ on, but I could be wrong. So I just wanted to explain the voting piece is different.
Yep.
And I'm prepared to speak to the resolution if you want to go through it.
And just related to that, you need to appoint the person who is
For
going to
VHI.
vote for you, because I need to send this in
Yeah.
prior to the meeting.
Right,
Yeah.
that's for the Vsba,
Yeah.
which is different.
And is the person who is representing and voting having information from their board?
That's the
It's
point
not
of
their
this
own
discussion.
personal, it's.
So she's
Right.
gonna,
Yeah.
she's gonna run you through the.
Right, but that's, I'm making, it wasn't a question, it's the board's vote. I'm not going by myself and voting how I want.
Right.
So is there anyone who would like to be our delegate to the VSBA conference, as well as the VHI and, what was the second one? Or two
VHI and
other.
Vsba, but it's-
VHI and Vsba
Their
meetings.
annual, they do those together. I'll just say that I've attended for a number of years. I have a conflict. I'm out of the state on the 19th. Otherwise, I'd volunteer.
Didn't Russ volunteer in our meeting that he was
I'm
gonna do?
planning on going.
What is the date
I
again?
haven't.
Which-
October
19th.
19th. The Thursday afternoon is the business meeting, and it's very good. You hear perspectives from other board members around the state, superintendents are there. It's very good discussion throughout the day.
Yeah.
In the business meeting, it's very productive.
I believe I can go. I confirm that with my work calendar, but
Yeah.
Let's see who's going, and then
Yeah.
see who amongst us wants to represent.
Yeah.
I have not registered, I'm going Thursday, Friday.
And you can decide at the annual business meeting, if three of you show up, you can do rock, paper, scissors and decide who gets to vote. You can decide at that later point. The VHI, you should probably have it signed ahead of time. But that's a separate business meeting, it's kind of pro forma.
And those are on the 19th as well, correct? Or are those on the 20th?
20th in the morning, I believe.
Ah, okay.
8:30 in the morning,
So it's gotta be some,
8:30 a.m.
It's part of the same 2 days.
Okay.
do you want to run through
The resolutions, yeah.
So I'll quickly go through the resolutions. So the VSBA meeting, regional meeting, was attended by as many people who've come there in the past, which was, it was great, held in Winooski. So the resolutions, I gave you a little cheat sheet. You have the full booklet sent as a PDF. It's an attachment to the agenda, so you can go through it. And just quickly, the first one, authorize the creation of school district innovation zones. The key point here is to the VSBA supporting legislation that allows districts to get waivers from specific regulation and policy. The big deliberation is, what does the word specific mean? And this comes out of some of the work that Elaine did with other superintendents. They wanted space for work to happen differently in schools. And this resolution is just, it provides VSBA advocacy related to allowing something different to happen.
So how would this work right now?
So right
read this
now,
and we say, well, I think I
you
think this is a bad idea for
yeah, you
this
want
reason.
Carnegie units down the line through from here to
No, I'm just saying,
eternity.
so do we debate this and say,
I would say
who
it's
says yes, who
clarifying
says no?
questions and, so let me back up. What I should have said to start is the resolutions provide direction for Nicole Mace, the executive director of the VSBA and the VSBA board. It provides direction to them about their advocacy work. Wordsmithing on the full resolutions, and those are also in this book, I believe. The language is in the booklet. If you go through it, page 24, you don't have that right now. And just clarifying that we don't need to wordsmith, we don't need to get into the weeds of anything. It's just providing a general direction for VSBA board and VSBA executive director. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So the first one, it's allowing a little flexibility in the school. And as far as our process tonight, I suppose we could, say, does anyone have a problem with flexibility in the school system? If someone does, what's the clarifying point?
Can I just provide a little bit of context also?
Yeah.
So the meeting that generated these elements, not the resolutions themselves, that was the VSBA. The meeting that was held with some VSBA board members and VSA board members, so the leadership of each of those organizations got together with a couple legislators, two, three legislators, Nicole Mace, Jeff Francis, and what we were really discussing for the whole day was, if we want to bend the curve on education spending and maximize the opportunities that we have for our kids, what do we think are the things that we could do that might be helpful? And so that was at VSBA office. If you've ever been there, that one whole wall is a whiteboard. And that was full of ideas. And in the end, we had our little dots, and we had to say, we think this one could work. So it occurs to me, because I wasn't in the middle of, what happened between then and here, I wasn't a part of. But I read these and I realize, oh, these are the ones that got the most dots.
Yeah.
That group of people said, we all agree we need to bend the curve on education spending, and we don't want to take our foot off the gas pedal of providing kids with the most opportunities they can have and make sure they have a great. So it's in that context that you read innovation zones, because as we see that the money gets squeezed, we don't want to be put in a position that the only alternative now is to put things in boxes. And if there's no flexibility, that's what happens. So the flexibility is like, as we're being pressured to spend less, we need to be able to be creative about how we do spend our money.
Yeah. And thank you for clarifying that, Elaine. I should have discussed the process of how it came about it. Superintendents, board members provided input, and then it was shaped into something more specific. And then there's just general discussion about the intent behind it. So what you're seeing is the intent behind resolutions.
I think Russ was first.
Yeah.
So if I could offer, there's all these resolutions here. I think we have another meeting before the actual VSBA meeting. To me, I've read through them. They're all, they all sound fine. They're pretty broad or pretty vague. They're not overly specific, and the devil in any of these is going to be in the details if there is actually something that's taken up at the state level. If we do have another meeting, which I think we would on the 17th, if anybody, feels strongly and wants to make an argument against any of these, then maybe we, put some time on the agenda to do that so that we can discuss that. But otherwise, if we're all, more or less in favor of, kind of the broad concepts, then I'm not sure we need to spend a whole lot more time.
That makes sense.
Going over the details of it.
Being able to digest, and I would suggest if you haven't read the book, go back and read it. That's a good idea. If I could run through each and just highlight a couple points that came up during the VSBA regional meeting, and then Dave, you can make decisions about how we proceed from there. Does that work?
Yeah.
I'll just run you through quickly. Okay, so the first one, it's about allowing flexibility. The second one, establishing statewide health insurance benefits for school employees. What's important about this resolution is that if there's a negotiating group, they want representation of the boards. They don't want the state doing the negotiation for boards. So it's that the VSBA would be at the table for any negotiating related to healthcare impositions. The third one is establishing target and equalized pupil staff ratios. There's discussion there that perhaps there's some differential based on school district configurations. There's some very small school districts in the state, and should there be some kind of difference based on the configuration of the individual districts. The challenge is that the staff-to-student ratios, it's not going in the direction that the state wanted to. And there's going to be pushback on budgets based on that. The fourth one explores state-funded retirement buyouts. As you know, that the money going into retirement systems is it's not where it should be, and the VSBA recommends the creation of a stakeholder task force. What does that look like?
Well, is that about the retirement system, or is this about, to me it reads as, it's talking about buying teachers out or buying employees out, giving them incentives to either early retire or on time. I'm not sure what they mean by that, but.
There are two tricky pieces here, and this will probably come up at the VSB annual meeting. One is number one, state funded. So if it's a state funded program and the state funding going to individual districts or whatever, based on the staff-student ratios. If you're not bringing your staff-student ratios, maybe you don't get as much money. That's going to be a challenge. Another challenging piece is maybe boards don't want to be in the middle of this because it's really a state problem. It's not a problem created by boards. But the fact is that the education funds are going to be rated wherever.
So it's the connection between its state-funded retirement and it's conditioned on achieving the ratios. So meaning, like, we'll only help you buying out your teachers if you make sure that you stay under the ratio. So if you have an opportunity, you have a retirement, they'll pay for the buyout if you don't backfill that position if your ratio isn't right.
Yeah.
So that's the complexity of that piece.
And my input to whoever would be doing the voting is just ensure that it doesn't create an entitlement program.
Right. Well, I think because of the ratios, they're hoping that the ratios is what keeps it from being in the entitlement program.
So that's going to be an interesting discussion, I'm sure. The next one, establish standards for fact finders in the collective bargaining process. This one is related to past practices of fact finders, just looking at comparables in the state and tending to go to the comparables. And the VSBA position proposed would be that there have to be more data points and, what are the standards? And I would just ask, what are other states doing? Whoever's going to that, we want some data. The next one, establish guidelines for reserve funds. This is going to be another interesting discussion. So we have a reserve fund for capital expenses, let's say. Other districts have reserve funds for whatever. So it varies all over the state. This one is asking for some standardization about reporting on reserve funds. A concern might be you report on reserve funds, then does the state start rating it? And we've had this question, so what's the appropriate percentage? So it's looking for guidelines about how reserve funds are handled in the state, because there is difference. That's it.
Okay, so we get a chance to chew on this for a month and come back, and we hope that Russ will go to the meeting, and perhaps Joan, is that right?
Joan is too.
You will go, okay, great. Awesome. And maybe others, anyone can go.
So in our October meeting, we'll revisit this and see if there's board consensus on supporting the resolutions.
Yeah, that'll be an action matter.
Okay.
Okay. 8.0 is
Thank
healthcare
you.
recapture. 8.4, healthcare recapture. Are you gonna walk us through this, Jean, or are we?
If you'd like, happy to. So this is, I'll tell you what the issue is, just as a reminder, this is because of the ACA. We have new healthcare plans within VHI. And at the end of the last legislative session, it was determined by the legislature that they wanted to capture the benefit of lower cost healthcare programs. And they have what they would call a preferred agreement. The biggest issue being sort of the 80-20 split on the premiums. So the intent is that the state is going to not, I can say, short our revenue, the revenue that we get by this amount, assuming that we executed to the preferred agreement. Now, the agreement we have with our district is not quite as, let's say rich is the wrong direction. It doesn't quite meet, it doesn't quite make the numbers that the preferred agreement does, and so that's the numbers that we've been kicking around. Believe it or not, the numbers that, if you're looking at this sheet, are a page full of numbers, and it's far less than what I took the finance committee through, so I won't walk you through it, but just at a high level, the top section where it says state calcs, that comes right from the AOE with how they calculated the number you see in bold, the 778,418. That's the number you've seen in the press. That's the number that the state will subtract from the revenue that they pass us over calendar year 18. They split it 65, 35. So the 505,972, that's the piece that we will not have in the fiscal year that we're in from the state. So not next year's budget, but this year. And then the rest of it, the difference will come out of our next fiscal year. So the second set of numbers is an estimate of what we will be realizing with the settlement that you guys did approve with the teachers. And just as a little reminder, I gave this to Mark to remind me to say this. These numbers here are different.
Our
Go ahead.
estimates, because everybody has to re-enroll in their healthcare. And we don't know if people, maybe some teachers will find it to be, some teachers on a spouse's plan right now, maybe we become more attractive, or maybe we become less attractive. We move up, and so we'll see. It won't, I don't think it'll be massively different. We're down to dollars here. There's no sense.
So you can see that when we just plug in the numbers with the agreement that we have, all things being equal, instead of the 778, we would get 622, and that's the difference where it says gap to the preferred plan is $156,000 is what split over 2 years, we have to come up with. And just because we will realize this in our fiscal year, but 100% of it we'll realize in our fiscal year, but the state's only taxing us 65% of that number in our fiscal year, we're fine for this year. But the year after that, we have to make sure we have the money in the bank, because we won't get it in revenue. So that's sort of not quite the 30,000.
The good news, bad news.
That's the good news, bad news. It's there are a lot of scary numbers. You'll start looking at 778,000, and it's like, where are people going to get that? We are the second biggest, number on the graph for the whole state, mostly because we're such a big system now. But the agreement that we do have with our teachers is not leaving us that short. It's questions?
Great. Okay, should we move on to action matter? Yes, Colleen.
Can I just add that I think it's important to remember that in our calculations for teachers and so forth, that they would be seeing personal savings this year as well. It's not just the board.
That's right. That's a good point. Okay, move on to action matters. We have 2 personnel items. One to approve a leave of absence extension, and one to approve a new hire nomination. I see support from the building level for the leave of absence, and I'm totally all for the new hire. Obviously, you need staff, correct?
Yeah. So the leave of absence is an extension of maternity leave supported by administration in the building. And yes, we hired a new French teacher at the high school.
I did see that this was done very quickly because the previous...
So we have come to term the French teacher at the high school as the defense against dark arts teacher. Because we did have 3 French teachers in a 3-week span.
Really?
But due to situations not of our control, we hired one person who then decided not to move. We hired one person who moved from out of state, was here for 1 or 2 days and left. And then Adam Bunting reached out to his network, and we hired an excellent teacher.
Chained her to her desk.
Yeah, she's in a cage.
That's in August. Don't they know that's the best month?
Yeah, right.
I can
Yes.
see February.
Right.
I've had a whole month of school and everything is wonderful. Peachy, in fact.
Okay, so can I get a motion to approve both personnel requests?
So moved.
Second, any further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, motion carries. 9.2, approve the work plan. We discussed this a little bit in our committee meetings. We discussed it in the executive meeting last week. Could I get a motion to approve the work plan?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
Second, okay. Any further discussion on the work plan? Hearing none. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Okay, 9.3, could I get a motion to authorize the COO to invite bids for the transportation route study?
So moved.
Second, and discussion. I would open discussion by saying we had a study that we paid money for out of our consolidation funds, and how is this
And one of
item
the
different?
One of the recommendations in that study was to look at the bus routes and see if there's any efficiencies to be gained. And that comes down to having to, place every student on a map and where they need to be picked up. So that was not, the transportation study was more of an overall study.
Okay. Would this be is this something that's done electronically by companies where they map things out and there's an
Yeah,
algorithm that decides on a route? And
I'm
plug
hoping
in
that's what it is.
You plug in a dirt road and say avoid that in
Rather than having
February?
people who've been doing this for our district for 30 years, knowing where the stuff are. And it better be more than electronic, because they got to go see some of the roads that they're sending our buses down to.
Okay.
But one thing is,
Sounds like Waze for bus drivers.
yeah.
It's the second time I've heard that in a week, and I've never heard of that thing until this week. Wow.
There are packages out there where, and in the transportation study, they had a recommendation to do this, but there are districts that do this where you have a full-time person who keeps addresses up all the time and keeps, and we could just never realize any kind of savings that would justify anything like that. But I talked to a couple people, and they think if you do a one-time study like every 5 years, just to see, are you really on track? Are you really being efficient? Is there some other way that you can be more efficient?
Is part of this study or part of the previous study are they going to be looking at how many bus stops we actually make? 'Cause when my kids were young, my neighborhood had one, maybe two stops, and now it's like door-to-door service. And we're probably making more stops and picking up fewer kids than we were 15 years ago. If I would put money on that. So, curious whether that's part of, what we're gonna be looking at.
We certainly can.
I think we should.
We're also looking at, some of our special needs kids who, they can't be transported on the regular ed buses, we're sort of making
I think
them
that's
a
a
special ed bus.
I think that's a separate matter.
No, I'm not saying it is the same, I'm just saying it's another thing that we want to try to wrap in and see if there's a better way that we can
Yep.
make those kids feel like more a part of the community. So, yes, and I would, do a little more research to figure out what kind of questions to ask, but I certainly can definitely run it by our committee, Lynn, and if you have any input on that.
Does the study also take into account how many kids actually take the bus on a regular basis? Because I know that a lot of buses are almost empty because students can either drive themselves or get rides, people that drive themselves, and then there'll be a bus sent through, it still has to go through its route, but then it comes to CVU with maybe 10 kids on it. Is it possible to look into?
Yeah, well, you know what, actually, this is part of my, my learning curve, but there are some things I just need to understand better. For instance, those buses also in an emergency may need to drive all those kids home. So if we're assuming it's only 10, but in an emergency evacuation, I don't have enough seats anymore, that can be a problem. But I don't know how that all works, because it can't be 100%. And also, to your point, I don't know if we have no sidewalks. Do you make the kids walk down the street? Those are kind of things I just need to think through a little bit more. It's just my learning curve, not up to speed on those kind of details yet.
Do we look at what other districts in Chittenden County are doing?
Sure, I can do that.
Do we have a motion on this?
We have a motion to authorize the study. Are there any more discussion? Is it fair to say, do you have a reasonable estimate for how much this would cost, or? I'm not gonna authorize you $1 million, nor am I gonna authorize you $50,000.
This way, we crossed out the 9.4 because I don't know, I've heard $30,000, which seems pretty steep to me, but I just need to get some information.
Okay.
Though I can share this, is that we're in negotiations with Betcha on the change in our contract, and my intent is to make those two numbers be the same.
Okay. All right. Okay, any further discussion? All those in favor of authorizing to invite bids for route study, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, motion carries.
Thank you.
All right, move to 9.5, accepting budget assumptions. That was in there, looked pretty standard. The 10% increase on VHI immediately was kind of surprising, but I guess they kind of hinted at that.
Yeah.
So,
Do you have a motion? Do you want to?
could I get a motion to accept our budget assumptions?
So moved.
Any further discussion?
On the VHI thing, that was actually VHI's, that's not a crazy assumption, is what they said.
Really?
But they're supposed to have numbers in mid-September, which would allow me to put better guidance in before you see the first passed budget.
Okay.
And just because it's a standard, I would like everyone to notice the bottom 5 lines on here.
Yeah, I did notice the ones that are pulled away. I did see that.
So we are
It's great that you're
aiming
capturing that.
aiming to get back that money that we told the community we would get. So the TBD at the bottom is just, we're just not far enough into the budget sessions, budget numbers to, for me to kind of guarantee you how much I'm gonna peel out, but we are, the staff and Mark, we're all kind of on board trying to figure this one out, how to get to the money that we wanted to return to the community.
Okay. Okay, all those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, motion carries. 9.6, appoint voting member for VHI and I believe Vsba.
You don't need to do it for Vsba. Vsba, you can just show up, and if it's Joan and Russ that are there, they can do rock, paper, scissors and decide who's going to be the person. So you can do that on that day. For VHI, you need to get it in.
Okay.
So VHI is the 8:30 in the morning, Friday morning meeting. And if you're not going to be there, there is an option to say that you appoint the Board of Directors of VHI to cast your vote. They would rather you do that than not appoint anyone.
Okay. Will you be there at that morning at 8:30?
Yes.
You will? Okay. So could I get a motion to appoint Joan as our voting member for VHI?
So,
Second? Any discussion? Hearing none? All those in favor?
aye.
Any opposed? None? Thank you, Joan.
Congratulations, Joe.
Could I get a motion to approve the consent agenda?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
All those in favor?
I have a question. What is this 19.5 cent differential?
On the fuel.
On the fuel bid.
What that means is that what the bid came in at is as a markup to a standard rate. So it's not a fixed amount. They're not saying, I'm gonna charge you $4 a gallon, and I'm guaranteeing it forever. It's like, whatever the particular standard rate is, this is the markup. That's what the bids came in. So it fluctuating.
Okay. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay. Our next meeting, committee meetings will be on October 3rd, and our next regular meeting is October 17th at 6 right here. And
So, it turns out that the November 21st meeting, regularly scheduled meeting, is during the Thanksgiving break. And when that has happened in the past, I know the board has chosen to do it on a different night, either the Tuesday before or the Tuesday after. So I'm just bringing it up so that you don't notice that in November, and then it's more difficult to figure out when to do it. It's up to you if you want to meet on that night.
Fine with me.
oh, on the 21st?
On the 21st. It's the Tuesday of that week. School's out of session.
So,
Tuesday of Thanksgiving.
I'd be more inclined to meet either the 14th or the 28th, just because so many of us have kids in school.
Is the 14th adequate time to prepare for what you need?
I'm going to look at Megan,
Megan.
yes. I'm looking at Jean, and then I go, oh, yeah, right, no, Megan. Right.
'Cause I think that's a better day than the 28th, but if you don't have time,
I think it is, the 14th is better also, because I was thinking the 28th is going to like bump it up against the very next budget meeting, with no time to digest what you just heard, so.
How about Sandy? Is it okay for you to close down your document distribution system a week early? Okay. All right, so without making a motion or anything, we'll just say that we'll move that meeting to the 14th and remind you all.
Yeah. We'll change the work plan, and we'll make sure that it's,
Committee meetings, we can discuss the structure, that they're not public. I mean, they're,
I think that we should have done that earlier. It's,
Maybe we can talk about it at our committees, at the next committee meeting. That might make,
my point is that the full board does not need to convene.
before the committee meeting.
Well, actually, I will need, for the next one, I will need a quorum, because we'll have a bid awarding to do for the Williston project. But in general, you're correct, Colleen, but I thought the idea was is that we may have to slide in, full board meetings before the committee meetings. If there's work that needs to be approved.
Right. You had a concern about
Well,
open meetings and?
the executive committee meeting that we had last week, Russ, me, Lynn, Dave, Elaine, I brought up I was not at the last committee meetings, and I was just asking, with the construct of the committee meetings, really the work that's happening there, it's not the full board. Forget the assembly of the full board at the beginning if that's what you need to do to take care of some action items, but you're not doing actions within the committees. And it may be that the committee, the construct seems to make a lot of sense because small groups doing focused work on very specific topics, you can get a lot done. But it could be that the financial group, for example, they might choose to meet on Friday morning at 8 o'clock. Or the communications committee might meet someplace else at another time. And I was just questioning the need to have, it's convenient to have it Tuesday nights, everyone has it on their agenda, but it's not necessarily a public meeting.
I thought we discussed this last year. This came up in discussion, and I thought we decided, or was even statute, that we had to warn even committee meetings.
And you have to have minutes, and you have to know who was there, but that's.
So, wait, yeah, I will agree with it. I will agree with it. I may have given Elaine some bad advice. I agree with you, and it's what we do already, so
Yeah, I understand, I'm not saying we don't. I
Yeah.
just want to make sure if we, how we do it.
It is not a full meeting of this board. The statute talks about public bodies and then defines public bodies further on. And even though you're not a quorum of the board meeting in committee, you still have to warn those meetings. Now, I think Colleen's getting to a different point here. That, are you saying just because they're not meeting on that night, they would still follow those strictures?
Correct.
Yeah.
So I think that this relates to the very first item on the agenda, the committee reports, and what notes you're getting. So we're making sure that we're following the rules around, what do you have to have for meeting notes? You have to have, when was the meeting, who was there, what actions we're taking. And we're including, and here are the things we discussed. No action will be taken, there's no quorum of the board. But we're meeting all those guidelines, all standards, rules.
And my point is, and, I'm sure I'm going to get pushback on this, it's when the board breaks into 3 different rooms, it's not really a public meeting because the board's not together in one room. You don't have RETN with 3 cameras and 3 different rooms, and you're, a lot of, some of the work, for example, would be an executive session. The materials, we can have some things that are public, but my feeling is that when the board, and I think statute supports this, when the board is together and we have a quorum and there's action, it happens in one place and it's public, and it's, even if no one shows up, even if there's no audience member, it's as if 500 people are in the room. It doesn't really matter.
Don't disagree. I agree with that. Yep.
Though we did, Mark, have a short discussion about if, say, for example, a negotiations committee wanted to go into executive session, what we may do to be specific is while there's an entire quorum of the board, vote the board into executive session, let them go off and do their work, while the rest of the board did other work. So I'm not sure, we haven't really figured out how that would exactly work, because a subcommittee can't vote itself into executive session.
Right.
But we have to kind of work on that one, on that.
But committee work, you don't.
I think it's, we're gonna have a disagreement. I think it's an open meeting. I think it's a committee of the board, it's open.
Opinion and agree. I think if
Yeah.
you're taking minutes and you're warning the public, it's a public meeting.
You're
Someone
doing
can
board
show up,
work
sit
with-
down next
yeah.
to you at that committee.
So the only, it seems like the only confusion here is if you need to have a confidential
Yeah,
discussion based
that I
on
agree. We need to
confidential
somehow figure that out.
committee work, I'm tasking Mark, through, Elaine.
I'll
Could
pass
you,
on.
yeah. Elaine,
I've
could
got
you
this,
task,
yes.
could you task Mark to
Yeah.
consult with our attorneys on what we should actually do here in
Yeah.
that case?
It's an interesting question for the finance committee and the
And the-
negotiations committee in
Right.
particular.
And I know Kate Webb did some work on trying to relax these,
Yes.
some of the committee rules
Yeah. so
in
the-
open meetings, so.
Yeah, but this part of it, I'm not even sure they've even thought about this part of it.
Okay. All right. So I think we've addressed all of your concerns. They're out on the table.
I did attach the open meeting laws to your agenda, so.
They all read
Yeah,
it.
they're on the back.
They usually are
That's right.
there.
No, they're actually,
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's the third page that I don't print out when it's a 3-page agenda.
no, Mark can attach, they're in the.
I
they're
attached the
in
whole thing.
Colt-
Was it just so?
They're in the Colt report.
Oh, okay. All right. Okay, could I get a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second. We're adjourned.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Who wants the pinks?
Sandy does.
So Jean,
Bunch the numbers and.
I will check that date and then I will check can't have from the meeting.
Sandy, can I give you this and you can?